Okay, here we go. The year is 1969, and I'm going to give you my top 5 albums for that year. And we're going to start with number 5. Now, 1969 was a very interesting year, much like 67, 68 was in rock and roll. It was very difficult for me to choose just 5 albums from this year, but I was able to do it, and here they are, starting with number 5, Crosby, Stills and Nash debut album. Now, Crosby, Stills and Nash was one of the first so-called super groups to come out. This was David Crosby from the Byrds, Stephen Stills from Buffalo Springfield, and Graham Nash from the Hollies. Incredible harmonies, solid musicianship. This album came out in 69, same year as Woodstock. They performed at Woodstock. Solid folk rock album. It's got love, it's got loss, it's got peace, it's the apocalypse. This album has songs that are grooving hard and, 1 minute, and lost in soothing reflectiveness the next minute. It is a superior album from that time period. It is, to me, the definitive statement of the Woodstock generation. So Crosby, Stills and Nash debut album, Crosby, Stills and Nash at number 5. At number 4, coming in at number 4, is the debut album of another band, Led Zeppelin. This album is a pioneer of hard rock, proto metal. It helped to create the heavy metal sound. It's a hard blues rocker, heavy music, psychedelic, folky, just a mix of everything. This is sheer bravado meets introspection. Led Zeppelin is both visceral and ethereal in this album. I mean, they are rocking hard in some songs. That's very melodic and dreamy in some parts, very trippy and psychedelic. Led Zeppelin kicked the door into the 70s and never looked back with this album. And it comes in at number 4, Led Zeppelin debut album, Led Zeppelin. The next album will not be in many people's top 5 of this year. This is a very underrated album. It's not really appreciated, even by the band who created it. And of course, I'm talking about the album Ummagumma by Pink Floyd. Even members of Pink Floyd now don't really want to have anything to do with this album. And I really don't understand what the big deal is about that, because Ummagumma is very underrated. To me, it's an experimental, it's dark, it's pastoral, it's spacey. It's a double album. One side is live music and the other side is a studio recording where each member of the band took their own basically side of that album and created something individually. Many bands have done this. Yes did it on Fragile. Kiss did it in multiple albums. So Pink Floyd was one of the first bands to do it. And what they created was a very strange album. The studio album is recordings of 4 of their classics from that era. Astronomy Domine. I think they had, Careful with That Axe Eugene, Set the Controls for the Heart of the Sun, and A Saucer Full of Secrets. So it was live recordings of these songs. Most of these songs are extended versions of the songs that you would hear on the studio albums, except for Careful What That Axe Eugene is not on any studio album, or up to that time, prior to that time. So that's the live side. The studio side is a bunch of experimental tracks. I like The Narrow Way, which is David Gilmour's offering. I do enjoy Rick Wright's Sisyphus. All four parts 1, 2, and 4 I really enjoy. 3 I could do without. I even enjoy Nick Mason's. Roger Waters had Grant Chester Meadows, which is a very pastoral song on this album. But it has a very strange feel to it. I always say that it has there's a show in the 80s called Tales from the Dark Side, and the beginning or the intro to that's what this album reminds me of for some reason. It's eerie, very trippy, creepy, dark, but kind of gives you a sense of peacefulness yet unease at the same time. Very strange. It is definitely the most avant-garde piece of music that Pink Floyd ever put to record, and it comes in at number 3 for my choices, 1969, Ummagumma. Very underrated album. Number 2, this is probably going to place on most people's top 5, and for good reason. It is Abbey Road by the Beatles. To me, this is the Beatles' adult album. They went through the boy band phase, they went through the experimental phase, they went through this sort of silly psychedelia, which I enjoy all of the Beatles material, but this is the adult album. This is the Beatles grown up, and to me it has a very nostalgic quality to it, because I grew up listening to this. My mother listened to this album. She sang songs from this album, and so I grew up with it. It has beautiful arrangements. It's experimental in places. It has a mix of everything. I mean, you've got Octopus's Garden, so you've got some of that silliness of the Beatles, psychedelia. You've got love songs. You've got experimental tracks on it. You've got rockin' track. I mean, it's got a medley on it. It's got Come Together, Here Comes the Sun. Probably one of the greatest love songs of all time, Something by George Harrison. And that's another thing. George Harrison had 2 classic tracks on this album, Here Comes the Sun and Something. I love She Came In Through the Bathroom Window. I love the medley at the end, Carry That Weight. I even love Maxwell's Silver Hammer. I love this entire album. It just brings back so much. It's a rush of emotions to hear this album. And to me, it is the quintessential Beatles album for me. 1969, number 2, Abbey Road. The only reason that Abbey Road didn't come in first place is because of this album, 1969's In the Court of the Crimson King by King Crimson. This is the Godfather album of prog rock. It is a plethora of genres, not just different variety of songs, but a different genres in one song. I mean, they mixed so much into different tracks here. You had rock, proto-metal, experimental, jazz, pastoral music. It's heavy, it's light, it's bombastic, it's minimalist, it's manic, it's peaceful, it's dreamy, it's madness. It's everything. All emotions, different genres of music. It's extremely well produced. It's extremely ahead of its time in certain areas. For example, 20th Century Schizoid Man is so far ahead of its time that it could have come out as a single today. It's not dated at all, that song. There's a couple of tracks that might sound dated, but that is definitely not one of them. This album explored the depths of what could be done in rock music with a hammer and a scalpel. It is one of the most complete albums that has ever been created in the history of modern rock and roll. And so it is definitely number one, my choice for the best album, 1969, my favorite album, and one of my favorite albums of all time, King Crimson in the Court of the Crimson King. So those are my 5 choices for 1969's albums. If you like this video, please give me a thumbs up, comment, share. I really want to know what you guys think about these videos. I want to know what your choices are. And you know, if you have any ideas or anything you want me to do, let me know. Hey, that's what this channel's for. It's not just for me to rant, but it's for us to share. It's a dialogue for people who love music. And so until next video, then you guys take care.